to go somewhere new. And I try to crack this iceberg open till it shatters through the...
Hey, what's up, guys? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Roland, and I'm here today with
Dalton Selvage.
And welcome to our very first episode of Time for Cuppa, the live podcast. So, as you can see, we already have Dalton saying hello with 3 L's.
And subscriber, by the way.
Yes,
most recent.
He is the most recent subscriber. So I want to go ahead and break down what you're seeing on your screen. As you saw at the beginning of that, the bottom middle there is the chat. The top right is the recent events. So if there's a subscriber or someone subscribing on what is it called? The thing where I get money. I don't know, but you can find that. In the description right now. I'll remember it later. But in the top left, there's the view counter, and it just tells us the current views. I don't know if it's working or not. I don't know if it will ever work. Yeah, I don't know if it's actually working because we actually have one pulled up right here, so I don't think it's working. If it's not, oh well, it's just a cool aesthetic, even though it shows 0. But welcome to our very first episode of Time for a Cuppa, and our topic today is why do bad things happen to good people? This is probably the most common question God ever gets on like a daily basis, because people are very curious about this topic, and it's also a very good topic to talk about. So if you guys are curious about the music before we start, you can find that also down in the description, but also go through the description and follow me on the socials if you guys don't know me, and be sure to subscribe. And if you are really curious about all of my videos, be sure to hit the bell icon for every upload. But let's go ahead and move on to the very first topic. So we're going to go and talk about the overarching topic of why do bad things happen to good people. So do you want to go ahead and start us out today?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like, why do bad things happen to good people? I think everybody in the world, whether you live out in the middle of nowhere, whether you live out in the middle of Canada where, it's wilderness and you don't know anyone, or you live in the big city, everyone has thought, why does bad things happen to good people? They feel pain, heartache, suffering from family members, or whatever it is. Bad things happen.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, the plainest answer is because we live in a fallen world, right? Right, in Genesis, man fell and we fell into sin, and the effects of that are felt until God redeems the earth, right? But, for now, the question is, why does God still allow these things to happen if he's so good, right?
Yeah. So, how can God allow all these bad things, like suffering or negative thoughts, violence, suicides, divorce? How can God allow all these things into the world? And honestly, the answer that I have is, well, if he didn't allow them, there would be no point to go to him. Because we wouldn't feel the suffering and the pain that we feel as earthly beings, which is just a natural feeling.
Yeah.
But there would be no need to follow God, or would even be afraid to, because we think that he's more wrathful and destructible. Although your microphone's not even plugged in. Professional. Yeah, so if it didn't sound very well, now there's gonna be a change in a few seconds here.
You can probably hear me now.
It's still not going. There it goes.
Okay, there we go.
Now there's a better volume. There we go.
Better.
Yeah.
My voice needs to be heard.
Yes. Yeah, for that little bit, you only were being heard on the computer and on my microphone, so it probably sounded terrible. But anyway, now that we have good audio, let's go ahead and continue on with the next question area. So, if God can be so good, how can he allow these things?
Yeah, well, let's think about Job. Job is the best example in the Bible about why does God allow suffering. And, Job had all these terrible things happen to him. If you don't know, it said he was blameless. It basically said Job was a good guy. That's what the book says. It starts out by saying, he had a family, kids. I mean, he had land and different things, and Satan came to God, and because God doesn't make bad happen. That's one truth that we find in Job. But Satan came to God and said, I want to tempt someone. And God said, have you seen my servant Job? He's blameless. He's a good man. And so Satan went and he wreaked havoc on Job. and God allows bad things to happen. And God allowed these things to happen to Job, terrible things where Job was suffering terribly. And Job did not curse God. Like, what a model for us to follow.
Oh yeah.
Definitely, because we live in a society that's all about us, and it's all about what's happening to us. But Job was very selfless. So while he was suffering, he just mourned for a week straight, and it said, I think it was a week, and he sat down, and 3 of his friends came and sat with him, and they sat with him for a week, just mourning, because he didn't have anything left. Basically, God allowed Satan to take away almost everything that he had. He did take away everything, really,
except for his wife, but.
Yeah.
I know that there's some great jokes out there, like, oh, but God knew what he was doing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The jokes that say he allowed him to suffer more because he kept his wife around.
Yeah.
Yes, they're funny. But so Job's friends sat with him, right? And they didn't say anything at first, but when they opened their mouths, they said, Job, you know why this happened to you? It's because you have some sin in your life. That's what they said. They said, man, you must have some sin in your life that we don't know about. And that's what the world likes to say, too.
Yeah.
That's the wisdom of the world that says, oh, bad things are happening to you. You must have some big problem in your life right now.
Yeah, or there's the other religions like Hindu and whatever, who believe in karma.
Yeah.
And rebirth, to where they believe that if you were bad and sinful in your past life, this life will be worse, and this life will have bad things. So there's that constant reoccurrence of, well, Christians can't believe that. Like that isn't something that God does. So it's something that the world believes the world does.
Yeah, that's certainly man's religion. That's like thought of by man. And like when people ask me about karma or say something about karma, like I say, well, why do the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? Because a lot of rich people they get rich from bad ways and like unjust ways. So like just thinking through karma and like thinking that if you do good things will happen to you, it just doesn't add up,
Yeah.
That's not how God operates.
Well, there is also the thing in the Bible that says if you that you reap what you sow, but that isn't necessarily karma. It's what the Christians like to label as their version of karma. But in a way, it's not necessarily karma. It's when you do a good deed and a good deed falls back on you.
Yeah.
It isn't when God intervenes and does something bad to you or allows something bad to happen to you, or good into you. He just like something else happens to you in the world.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm always doing good things for you, Ethan, I'm sure you'd think one day, man, I want to do something good for Dalton.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty basic thing that just does happen.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure. To talk about Job a little more, Job just listened to his friends when they were giving him all this bad advice. The Bible recorded the bad advice, So when you read Job, you're thinking, oh, well, is that true? But you got to be careful because it accurately records what his friends said, but maybe not what the truth is,
Yeah, like it was more recording it to let you know what not to say in this situation.
Sure.
Like if we ever do find a situation like this, highly unlikely because Job was an amazing person. Even before the whole event happened. There goes my diffuser. But even before this whole event happened, Job was still a great guy. He was still he was strongly following the Lord with no falter. And it's very hard to find, but if we ever do find a situation like this, do not ask those kinds of dumb questions. Or even in general, don't ask those dumb questions like, oh, it must be sin in your life.
Yeah. Because God's not punishing us right now for sin, right?
Yeah.
But that's what hell is.
Yeah.
Right?
And on that, do we actually want to explain why does God allow people to go to hell? Because that is also a really hard question for the people have.
It is, but we need to touch on one more thing that I think is important to the question, why do bad things happen to good people.
All right. Yeah.
We talked about part A, which is why do bad things happen? Okay?
Mm-hmm.
We got that down. But the second part is why do bad things happen to good people? Now, the Bible described Job's life as good, and a lot of us would say, yeah, I'm a good person. I'm a moral person. But the Bible also said all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
Yeah.
And in Romans it says their mouth is an empty tomb. And at one point in my life, my mouth was an empty tomb. You know, in everyone's life, we're all born into sin. But God saves us from that. So the point is, we can't look at ourselves and say, well, I'm a good person. That shouldn't happen to me, because there are none that are good.
Yeah. Like, I was actually watching a video, not about like a religious topic or anything, but it was talking about like four things to remember if you want to be like happy or something or like that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was you are not exempt from like fill in the blank. You're not exempt from bad things to happen to you. You aren't exempt from being like the one non-sinner in the world. Like you cannot fall into the 1% that does not follow the rest of what the world is.
Yeah. I mean, we're all there, right? Humanity, people try to exclude like African American people, or they try to exclude like people in a different like social group or something like that, as we're not humans. Or like we're not, like we all have the same problems is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, like we all have the exact same situations. Now, some people may come from different backgrounds than others, like may have different opportunities or less opportunities, but we still all have the same struggles and we all still have the same God.
Yeah. 1 Corinthians says, for no temptation has overtaken you uncommon to man. So it's saying, whatever you're struggling with, yeah, other people are struggling with that too. You're not a special case, you know?
And that is also a good way to remember for people who have like a mental disorder or any other like situation that they're in, they feel alone, like depression or whatever. If you feel alone, remember that there's always someone else. It's probably tons of people out there in the world who have the same situations that you have.
Yeah. And they're tough, and I mean, that's an example of suffering. And it's on my heart, you know, for those who suffer with that. I want to be able to love them and show them compassion and that someone cares. So, yeah. So
now that we've talked about why do bad things happen to good people, if you feel like you've gone through all that well enough.
Yes, I think so.
So now we should move on to, if God can be so good, how can he allow suffering or hell, negative thoughts, violence, suicide, divorce, etc., etc.? So let's start out with the one that we wanted to talk about beforehand. So how can God allow hell? Like, why does he allow people to go to hell? Why does he send them to hell? This is a hard one.
There is a group of people called, or they would subscribe to being a universalist, which says God saves everyone and Jesus' death paid for the sins of everyone, even those who don't believe in him. But this is simply wrong. It's not found in the scriptures, in the Bible. God created us for his glory, right? He created us to worship and serve him. And we rebelled. Like I said it before, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So we have this dilemma here. How can we be right with God? How can we be right and acceptable to an all-powerful, holy God when we aren't? Right? So it would be impossible for God to accept us as sinners, like just for no reason. Because, well, that's exactly why Jesus came, right? Jesus came to pay the penalty of sin, and that's why we can stand acceptable before God. But then, why didn't Jesus die for everyone, right? And the answer is because it's a really tough question, because he could have. But God displays his justice by saving some, and he does allow others to go to hell. I think hell is best described as the absence of God.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think that's a good way to say it, yeah.
Holiness is the absence of sin. You know, holiness is God. But God had to send people to hell because it shows his characteristics. God couldn't show his justice if he didn't create us. God is Trinity, right? God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And for eternity past to eternity future, they were in perfect love and harmony with one another. But they couldn't show one another grace because they're all perfect. They couldn't sin against one another, right? So God created us. And now we have God has the opportunity to show us grace. And he does, bountifully, for those who accept Christ as their Savior, right? And the flip side of that, if God doesn't show his grace, that characteristic of God, he can show his justice. So that is why there has to be a hell. Absolutely.
On the idea of hell, how much do you know about the Jewish idea and belief? Or even, is hell ever mentioned in the texts that the Jewish people actually read? Because I've talked to someone who is Jewish, and he mentioned that they don't even believe in hell. So that's something that kind of threw me off, because I didn't realize that they might not even believe in hell, because I've always obviously been raised on that.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also the idea, like, people couldn't even go to hell or heaven until Jesus came, creating the path for us to go to heaven. At least that's my understanding.
Well, that's a really good question. I'm slightly blindsided with the first part. However, the second part, I heard it in a rap song once. This is how it was put. Before the cross, they were saved on credit, the righteousness they didn't have, which was Jesus. Mm-hmm. After the cross, they were saved on debit. It was what Jesus already paid, right? And in the Bible it says, they were talking about Abraham, and they said, for Abraham's faith, it was accounted to him righteousness. So it's by faith in God alone that we are made righteous before him. And it has always been that way. Like, I don't know too much about the Jewish traditions and how they believed the afterlife worked. And it might be a little different. I can't really speak to it though too much.
For anyone who's ever watching this, either in the future or right now, if you guys have any knowledge about this, go ahead and let us know in the comments or in the chat right now, so that we can understand this more. Because we're both kind of curious about if it does mention that. I'm sure. Yeah. Because when I heard my old friend talk about that, I was a little bit thrown back because I had no idea that was ever mentioned. But he could also not be a very well-educated Jew, not know a whole lot of the texts. So there could be like a toss-up. Like, I'm not saying that he's like not like a bad Jew or anything, but like a lot of Christians don't know a whole lot of the Bible, so like that kind of idea. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if anyone knows that information, let us know in the chat or description, or chat or the comments. Just let us know later on. So yeah, do we want to move on now?
One last thing is, like, you know, Jewish tradition changed all the time, so there may have been times where they said, oh well, we don't believe in a hell or whatever it may be, but the scriptures do teach that there is a hell. I think the Old Testament, it can even be found in there. So a lot of Jewish thought is sometimes tradition and what they have passed down. But that's all I have to say on that.
Yeah. And also, that's a little noisy. But also, to keep in mind, from what I've heard, I've not done any personal studies in this. I believe that the current version of the Torah, I think, is the version that they read now. Okay. That was written about 2,000 years after Christ. the like, well,
okay.
maybe not 2000, but
what they read.
yeah, like currently of what they read right now, with the addition of the fact of saying that Jesus wasn't the Messiah, because they do have that added in there as a little, as like a reference to him.
They have something called apocryphal writings, which is extra text they add in. And I believe they claim they're not scripture, they're not like inspired by God, but they're the Jewish writings, so they keep them as tradition.
Which, in case you guys are curious of how I know that, with never reading what that is, I don't know how he knows that, probably from other studies, but I know that because in a lot of the Gospels, in the first 4 Gospels, or maybe 3 only, after the death of Jesus, it talks about how the Jewish faith and the Jewish teachers had changed and written into their word that Jesus was not the Messiah, and that it says that is still written there today. If I had my Bible over here, I'd read it up and open it up, but I don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a few more topics, and it's almost a half an hour point, which we can always talk for much longer if we need to. Like, just keep it around about half an hour. We can always go for 45, 50. Mm-hmm. I just want to keep it under an hour long, because hour longs usually are hard to sit through.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and do a bit of collection of some of these.
I think some of them can go together too.
Yeah.
Like negative thoughts and violence.
I'd say honestly, negative thoughts, suicide, and violence can all go together.
Yeah.
Because they can all mean very similar things. And also maybe suffering can be wrapped in there too.
Mm-hmm. Those are all examples of how suffering can happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the negative thoughts, violence, and suicide, how can God allow that?
Yeah, I mean, I think of domestic violence. I think of God allowing a small child to be brought up in an abusive home, and I think of negative thoughts. I think of people. I think of all the hate built up in a lot of hearts, and sometimes this hate gets so large and so great that they decide that suicide is the best option. They feel hopeless. Seeking the world, seeking what the world has to offer. These are the things that will leave you feeling empty, and they will lead you into violence and negative thoughts. It makes me think of the parable that Jesus said when someone tries to cleanse themselves from some sort of evil they have in them. He might have used demon, I don't know. But they cleanse themselves of this demon, and the house is swept clean, is what it says. But then, like, they appear outwardly good, and they're probably happy. And people in our society do this. They get their life together. They get out of rehab, and they're doing fine. They get a job. But then 6 months down the road, they're drinking again, and they
relapse back to what they were doing.
They relapse back
because they opened up a hole in their heart, but they never actually refilled it. Because the evil had gotten into their heart and had corroded them, and they swept it out, and they opened up their heart, and there's just an empty spot. And for everyone who maybe does not have Christ, there's an empty spot in your heart, and your soul craves for God. And when you don't fill that up with God, or understand that God is where that was what goes in that hole, then you'll just end up going right back to where you were, because Satan knows what gets you, and Satan will put it right back to where you are.
And that's what he wants. It's just heartbreaking, because the world offers short-term solutions. And they say, well, just do it again, drink again, relapse again, get angry again. And each time, it only digs the hole deeper. It only makes you think that the next time will fulfill you. And, it's cyclical. It's a cycle. And if your heart isn't changed, if God hasn't removed your heart of stone and put in you a heart of flesh, these cycles will always continue. But God is our only salvation. And I suppose that's a reason why God allows the suffering. It is the reason why. Because it shows that He is the only way. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me." I think in my own personal life, my times of glorifying God and praising God and praying to Him the most have been at times of my greatest suffering and my deepest anguish and my just bad, dark moments in life. So I thank God for those times.
And another thing that I want to point out is, if God didn't have these sufferings in your life, how would you learn anything? How would you learn anything about God?
Yeah.
Because through the sufferings, God does not orchestrate the sufferings or the pains. He only finds a way to make them learn, like to make you learn from them and to make you grow and to make you blossom from this pain and suffering. And it's not bad. Like, the suffering is not a bad thing. It may hurt and be really hard in the moment, but it's just turbulence on a plane. It's temporary and will not kill you.
Yeah, exactly. The Psalms or the Proverbs, one of them says it is more profitable for a man to be sad than happy, because by a sad countenance the heart is made better.
Yeah.
And you learn from it and you praise God in that. So it's such a good thing to be sad sometimes. One time, it wasn't too long ago, I was sad and I was thinking, man, it's a good thing I'm sad, because I'm going to praise God for this, that He's going to pull me out of this.
That's great.
Yeah.
I've never thought that before when I was through a sad moment in my life.
I wish it would happen more, and I
Yeah.
could recognize God's sovereignty and God's love and allowing these things to happen to me yet still.
And for most of my life, most of my life has been a sad moment. Not for any outward reason other than just my own mind playing tricks on me. And me imagining that I was much worse off than I am. My emotions and my hormones being all unbalanced and everything. So I was in a bad point in my life mentally where I was really low in depression. I was really close to suicide. I was really close to all these horrible things. And then everything around me got cleared up, and I was able to go to church. That was actually a strong Bible believing church and taught me really well. And from there, now I'm growing up and I'm blossoming and I'm learning so much about God's will and how all the suffering taught me great things and great practices to put into my life.
Yeah, God certainly changed your heart. And from that, you might still sometimes, because we're still in the flesh, right? You might still seek some of these earthly things, but your inner being now knows that they will leave you empty, right?
Yeah, certainly. So there's one more topic on this of the idea of how can God allow blank. So how can God be so good and allow divorce? Because I know very well that marriage is very, very important to God.
Absolutely.
It's one of the more important things, like combining two souls together who love God as much as He does, or as much as each other do, and just want to praise God, and who are a good marriage, but something happens, they quote unquote lose love for one another and they get a divorce. How can God allow this, even though marriage is so important to God?
My goodness, I almost don't know where to begin.
Yeah.
Like one of the first things that God implemented, right? Like He made the earth, He made all the animals, He made all these things good. He made man, and man was alone. And the first thing that God did for man, after He gave him all the animals and dominion over everything, was He gave him a wife. He created marriage.
Yeah.
And He created it good. That was the first thing. And it says in Ephesians that like marriage is a picture of Jesus and the church. The church, all the believers, are His bride, and Christ is the groom. And this is a picture of the husband seeking after pursuing a woman, and the woman accepts, and they are Jesus's. or the grooms, you know? And that's the picture. Christ laid down his life for his church. Jesus said, and Jesus talks about marriage in Matthew 19, and he just says, what God has joined together, let man not separate, right? Like, it's just, the human mind always rationalizes that this marriage isn't working out, or I can find someone better.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that that's the sinful human state, you know? It's like marriages can be worked out,
Mm-hmm.
right? Divorce comes from a selfish place. It comes from saying, well, this person isn't right. I can't love them through this. Christ loved us through so much. Christ loved us through everything.
Yeah.
All of our sin and like our, and we still stab him in the back. We still fall in sin.
Mm-hmm.
And Christ loved us through that. That is what a marriage is supposed to be. A marriage is supposed to be loving each other despite their weaknesses and their differences.
Now, for the idea of divorce, some people get a divorce because of violence,
Mm-hmm.
and the men beat the woman, and
Mm-hmm.
there's no place in a marriage for that.
No.
There's no place in anywhere in the world for violence,
Mm-hmm.
but it happens anyway.
Yeah.
And to the people who are gonna maybe dislike what he just said about marriage and how divorce is something that should not be a thing,
Mm-hmm.
keep in mind that people's hearts can still be changed.
Mm-hmm.
People's hearts can go from a heart of stone to a heart of flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And they can soften their heart, and they can actually, through maybe a lot of time, be a better husband or wife.
Yeah.
And be a much kinder person to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that will take time.
It does, but at the same time, like, I wouldn't advocate for any person to stay in a extremely abusive. Like, you can't. Divorce is terribly bad, but you can't have a woman staying with her husband if he beats her every night.
Yeah.
So it's such a hard thing to talk about. Each situation's different, but you know, God has made marriage good, so it's something to it's something to fight for, you know.
Mm-hmm. And another deterrent from divorce is Jesus does say that on the idea of adultery,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus does mention that a man who divorces a woman, forces her to commit adultery. And if a woman remarries, then she commits adultery.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd assume that also goes for men, but
Yeah.
they were talking about women more because of the way that the culture was.
Yeah.
And churches often use that as an attack towards someone who wants to get divorced, even if the marriage is a violent marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a church, that is not the right way to do anything. Never attack someone for their choice or their idea. Try to nurture them and understand where they're coming from and listen to them out. Like, for this person who I have in my mind, the marriage was violent. Talk to them, ask them why they went to the divorce, and come to the conclusion that that was a bad location. That was a bad place for them.
Yeah.
And understand that if they want to try this marriage again, then they should find a place for the ex-husband at this point to get help. Whether they be in the church or some other building, allow them to get help. But this whole area of divorce, how it can be, like, the whole misconceptions around it and the entire belief system of divorce is very, very controversial at some points.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very hard to dance around and say things that will not make people yell at you.
It is.
Or even come to a conclusion yourself sometimes.
I think it's always the last option.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just a matter of not getting along, I don't think I could ever advocate for divorce. But in a situation with an abusive husband or a wife even that, like such as abandonment. If a husband or wife abandons their partner, and abandonment can be in situations such as a husband turning to alcoholism and drinking so much to neglect his family, that's abandonment. That might be one of the only circumstances, or like extreme abuse, you know? Sometimes I say extreme abuse, but you're thinking, well, what about abuse? I mean, I don't know where the line is, you know?
Yeah. It's just really, really hard to determine for yourself where that line is, and let alone be able to come up with a good way to tell someone what you believe and how it can be good and accommodating to everyone else's beliefs as well. And how it can actually help them more. But it's a very, very hard thing to really come up with and understand.
Yeah, really tough.
Now let's move on to something a little bit less controversial and less difficult to talk about.
Sure.
So you've mentioned a story where you have had a rough patch, and you don't have to tell that story, but what's one time that you've suffered or gone through a rough patch in your life that God has taught you through and taught you something drastic through? And you can be vague. You can make up names or anything like if you need to, but
My friend Henry, no, just kidding. I think the first thing that comes to mind is, I guess, my freshman year in college. So, you know, that was my first time away from home, and, you know, I was fine being away, but I just kind of I was a little isolated, you know? I was on my own, and I tried to not need anybody, so I got lonely, you know? And I think in that loneliness, God kind of taught me to seek Him. God taught me diligence and, like, reading my Bible and things like that. My freshman year of college is a time where I really dug into the Word, and I planned out my, I planned out my readings for in the mornings, and that's when I started doing that the best. And doing that was just really good for me. But that was in a time of kind of loneliness, you know? And everyone's suffering is unique to them. So I can understand that you're suffering, Ethan. I can understand that, but I can't always relate to it. But I can know that you're suffering, because everyone's suffering is different, whether it's with a mental illness or with financially, you know, or marriage, good one.
Just family in general. There's tons of things that people can struggle with all the time.
Just so fast. But God is the rock, God is the light at the end of the tunnel that our faith is in.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And before we really move on to anything else, do you want to just have any closing thoughts on our topic of what bad things happen to good people? Any like last minute thoughts or anything before we move on to the last half of our, or last third of our podcast here?
I guess my last thought was something said in the book of Job, when all these bad things happened to Job, and it said, "Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped, and he said, 'Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.'" I can't think of that almost brings a tear to my eye. Honestly, what commitment to the Lord, what love for the Lord when He allowed bad things to happen to him. And he said, "God, none of this is mine. None of this is mine. You gave it to me, you loaned it to me, and I took care of it, and you take it away, and that's okay." We all need this attitude like Job more. I guess that's my one challenge for anyone listening.
Yeah,
have this attitude like Job.
Don't be selfish.
Too.
Don't be selfish with what God's given you. Your own body, the objects in this world. Don't be selfish, and even like if your phone gets missing, don't get angry. Like, things in this world don't really matter in the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's something we need to think about. So I just have a few lightning round questions, things that don't really relate to the topic, but I think about asking this to every single person I interview.
Yes.
And just
This
like
is a pattern.
yes, like this is gonna be a constant thing. So I'm gonna ask you a question, and without taking too much time to think about it, give me an answer.
Okay.
And they shouldn't be too hard to answer. They should all be pretty good and have your own idea of what the answer is already.
Okay, I got it.
So the first one is, who is God?
God. The great I am. I am who I am.
Okay. What is hell?
Eternal separation from God.
Why did Jesus save us?
Because he loves us, to show his grace. He's just awesome for doing that.
This one might be a little harder to answer, but you may already have your answer.
I have a lightning answer for you. Hit me.
Okay. Why does God seem more evil in the Old Testament?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yes.
Well, God has chosen to reveal himself in a different way in the Old Testament than in the New Testament. Both are equally inspired by God. Both are 100% by God. But God showed his non-tolerance for sin in the Old Testament. He showed his holiness, really. And in the New Testament, he sent Christ and he showed his grace and his love, and all these things are revealed in it. And it's beautiful. It's what God has made.
Mm-hmm. And for me, an answer that I have, just to grow on your answer, is compare the story of the end times to the story of God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah.
Do you want me to compare them?
Well, no, just imagine in your head, they're very similar.
Sure.
God destroys a group of people for their sin, but he takes out Lot and his family because they are God's people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it replicates on a smaller scale what the end times is going to be like, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So the God then is always going to be the God now.
Mm-hmm. He's always been a saving God.
He will always save you, and he always has the want to get rid of sin, but not in a way that will destroy everything and everyone. He wants to get his people out.
He's merciful. Exactly.
Last one.
Okay.
Why did you choose this topic? Now, honestly, this one's a little bit hard because we both kind of agreed on the topic, but why did you choose the area of the topic?
I just, I thought it was something that it related to everybody. Like what we talked about at the start, everyone has to suffer. So this is a question applicable to everybody. And I wanted
everyone
to
asked this question.
Yeah. So I wanted to be relatable to people, and I found no better question.
Yeah. And one final question to end off. The interview with you has nothing to do with Christ or the topic.
Good.
But how much do people influence you, either on social media or in person? Any form of influence. How do people influence you? Like how much, and so on.
I
if
think,
at all. Because people don't have much influence.
Some people would say they're not influenced by others, but I would call them
Liars.
wrong. Yeah, liars. You know where liars go, right? Law school. Well, I think everybody is influenced greatly, more than what you know, by other people. And, I can't think exactly how much I've been influenced, but I'm certain that it was quite a bit. Because I don't think I would think how I think or be as I am if it weren't for all those who loved me and built me up, to be who I am now.
Yeah, certainly.
Like you're a product of your environment, kind of, you are what you eat, all these little sayings that we have, all these axioms we have. They hold a lot of truth because if you're listening to some, I don't know, environmentalist, for example, you're probably going to start caring a lot about the environment. If you really listen to it all the time, you're going to be very active and you're going to want to protect the environment. It's the product of your environment, So people who I've listened to, the music I've listened to, the people I've put in my life, they've all influenced me, in one way or another. How you make jokes, how you smile, how you laugh. You ever been with a friend for so long and you pick up on their laugh.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with someone and they were talking about that. I was like, I've done the same thing, and it's just kind of hilarious, but it proves it true. So, quite a bit.
Yeah. Do you have any last minute questions for me or anything before we close it out?
How was your cup of tea?
It was good at the beginning. Now it's a little bit cold now.
Mine's empty. So
I'll leave a little bit with some of the grains in there still. The leaf.
yeah,
But yeah, the green tea is pretty good.
I love it.
Yes, and for those of you who are not aware, we did have tea today, and for every episode of Time for a Cuppa, that is the purpose of the name. We will always have tea, because tea is a great thing to sit down and talk to someone about.
Tea will be in heaven.
Hopefully.
I hope so much.
Because green tea, other teas, like I have a table full of teas, which is why I chose Time for a Cuppa. I have teas and I have some coffee and some hot chocolate for anyone who wants it.
I wish you could all see the amount of tea and coffee sitting over here.
Yeah, no, like seriously. I have an entire dresser covered all the way with tea and coffee.
It is immaculate.
But it is good for the soul. It really calms you.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you all so much for either listening in or watching afterwards. But if you guys are watching afterwards, or even right now, go ahead and subscribe. Go ahead and hit the bell icon. Go ahead and like the video. Comment something amazing down below. Tell us something that you've gone through, that you have been taught something amazing about. But go ahead and click on all the links down below. Check out my socials. Check out my Patreon. And also check out my other videos. I have sermons. I have vlogs. I have tons of great stuff for you guys to watch, so go ahead and check all that stuff out down in the description down below. But I will see all you guys in the next one. Go ahead and say something.
Oh, peace out, home dogs.
Okay, see you guys.